Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I thought I would do a little buyer's guide for the 7th edition Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. This isn't going to be a comprehensive list at this point in time because there's a lot of supplements and adventure compilation books that I simply don't own at this point in time, but I do have at least a handful of things for the latest version of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, and it's quickly becoming one of my favorite systems that I've run at this point in time. So it would be nice to sort of have a video where I could at least do little small reviews or overviews of several of the different products, and you can use that to decide which ones of those you might want to add to your collection. So the first thing is the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. So right here we have the Keeper rulebook. This is essentially your all-in-one core rulebook. You could absolutely run the game with this and nothing else but this. So that is certainly an option for people that like to have sort of a more minimalist collection. The Call of Cthulhu role-playing game is sort of a cosmic horror RPG in which the players play just your typical run-of-the-mill humans as they try to deal with forces far beyond their mortal comprehension. The system uses things like sanity and insanity quite a bit, and you come across some of the most iconic creatures in all of like gothic horror writing, or cosmic horror writing, all thanks to the wonderful stories done by H.P. Lovecraft. So I've been a fan of Lovecraft ever since I first discovered his work, and I own a ton of compilation books of his short stories, and I'm pretty sure I have every single story that he's written throughout the dozen or so books that I have, and so I've just always been a really big fan of this once I discovered it. My favorite stories within his series of works would have to be Shadows over Innsmouth, Dagon, Call of Cthulhu, and At the Mountains of Madness. They're just all, you know, if you were to read, if you were to start your journey into Lovecraftian stories, those are the ones that I would recommend. I would probably start with something like Dagon, which is a much shorter story, just sort of get a feel for how he does his stuff. But anyway, that's sort of a whole other subject here. But one of the things that I actually really like about this role-playing game is that you are just regular mortal beings. You're just regular everyday humans that are just put in situations where, you know, it's just far beyond their ability to control or even understand what's going on. The system uses percentile rolls for essentially everything. The easiest way to think of it is that the percentile dice are the equivalent to like a d20 in modern day Dungeons and Dragons. You use it for your attack rolls, you use it for your skill checks, and things along those lines. The Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, as written sort of by default, is more of an interactive storytelling, investigative type of system. So it's not one that you're going to, you know, go through dungeons and fight monsters and find treasures. I mean, you can do those things, but that's not what the game is sort of built around. In fact, in this system, if you go around trying to fight everything you encounter, it's going to go horribly. I've run one adventure for two different groups, and both groups ended up not making it through the encounter. But that's okay, because another aspect of this system is that even if the party wipes, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the story. You know, something that happens a lot in Lovecraftian stories is, you know, the characters will have something horrific happen to them, and then they'll just suddenly awaken like some indeterminate period of time later, with no idea of what sort of happened in between. And it's cliche for sure within, you know, this type of system, but that's sort of the approach that I wanted to take for these early stories, because it's something that, you know, you can sort of identify with that type of the type of stories that Lovecraft wrote. So it's an excellent system from that perspective, and I love the fact that it is more about investigating and role playing. So the players, at least in the games that I've run, have spent a lot of time just coming up with ideas of who they want to talk to. It's been more of a role-playing heavy system for me than even things like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, which has, you know, role-playing in it, but is much more at its heart a combat game. So it's an absolutely excellent change of pace from that perspective, and something that I definitely needed to balance out the fact that I was running multiple different games all at the same time, and even though they were different systems, they were all really combat oriented, and the stuff just sort of melded together in my brain. So having this more storytelling based game and less combat oriented is something that I just really sort of attached myself to, and I absolutely love it. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit different than like hack and slash or high fantasy or even science fiction, science fantasy stuff, then this is something that is definitely worth picking up. And again, the beautiful thing about this book is that it is all in one. And really, the keeper is the only person that really needs a copy of this book. It's not a system where you have tons of special abilities that you constantly have to be referencing. It doesn't have a traditional leveling system, so you don't like fight monsters, gain experience, and go up in levels. It actually has a really awesome leveling system in my opinion, because you level up your skills based off of which skills that you've used over the course of the scenario that you've gone through, and at the end, so whenever you make a successful skill check, as long as you didn't, I think if you didn't push the roll or something, there are some exclusions to how you get this. But you check off this box next to the skill on the character sheet, and at the end of the scenario, you get to roll to see if you improve your skill. And the way that you do that is you make a skill check, and normally with the rolls, you want to get your number or below. So it's sort of like ability checks in AD&D, where you wanted to get your number or lesser. However, if you're trying to improve your character, you actually want to roll above that number. So it's a situation where you need to fail that roll to improve your skill. And what that means is that if you succeed on a skill check, and at the end of the scenario, when you go to see if you improve your character, if you roll your check and you succeed, meaning you rolled your target number or below, it means that you sort of use that skill in a way that is familiar and comfortable to you. So it's one of those things where I guess the way that I sort of look at it is, if you know that 2 plus 2 is 4, you can't just keep saying 2 plus 2 is 4 to increase your knowledge of mathematics as a whole. But if you fail the check, meaning that you rolled above your target number, so if your percentage chance to succeed was 55 and you rolled 56 or higher, it means that you use the skill, but in a way that's sort of new to you, or you try to slightly different, technique, or there was just something different about the way that you utilize. So, you may have come across a different mathematical formula, for example, if you're doing, mathematics stuff. If you're trying to pick a lock, for example, you may have tried a slightly different technique with the tools. And if you manage to roll above your target number, then you get to roll a d10 and add that to your skill check. Or you get to add that to your skill number. So it's kind of a fun way of leveling up. And you do the same thing for your luck points, which is another great system that I really like in this game as well. You don't have to necessarily keep really tedious track of things like equipment or money spent and stuff like that. You just sort of have things that you can look at. Like with money, you have a sort of a spending limit, and if you're spending less than that limit, then typically you don't have to worry about taking it from your available funds. So it's just one of those things that it's like, no, you just, it's within your means to do so, to get this, so you can do it. With things like, with luck, the way that I like that system is it has two different functions. One of them is optional, but I do recommend allowing the players to use it. So the default luck skill is something that you can roll in situations where you just need to rely on luck sometimes. The way that we sort of used it in our game is when the characters got to the town that they were sort of looking around in, they went into this mine area, and it was like, did I bring my gun with me? And I said, well, roll a luck check to see if you actually had thought about bringing that with you at that point in time, or having it in the car in the first place when they first set out on on their journey. So you can sort of use it for things like that. The characters broke into a disused chapel, and they had to roll a luck check to see if they could exit the chapel without being spotted, sort of thing. So there's different uses that you can do with luck there. And if you roll for something, the optional ability is that if you roll for anything except like attack rolls, so combat related things you can't use luck for. But for just regular skill checks, for example, if you fail, you can actually spend your luck points like a resource to turn a failure into a success. So it's just sort of a nice option there, and a system where if the story hinges on, and it probably shouldn't, but if the story hinges on a single die roll, then having the ability to spend luck points to make a success out of a failure, I think is a really great system. So really enjoying this, and for anyone that's interested in like more horror-based RPGs, if you're a big fan of like cosmic horror, like Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, all those types of elder beings, then this is an excellent system for you to consider. And again, the only person that needs this is the keeper. The players really only need what's on their character sheet, and that's it. So it's a really elegant system that way. The retail price for it is $54.95 US, and it translated to around $70 Canadian, but it was well worth the price for that. However, there's more than just the core rulebook out there, so while this is something that I highly recommend, there are other ways that you can enjoy the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game without necessarily having to purchase this, or at least not needing this right away. So that's going to lead me right into the next item here. And that next item is the Call of Cthulhu starter set. Now, this set is absolutely fantastic. It is, having spent some time with it, it is easily my favorite starter set product that I own. Part of that might be the fact that it's sort of a new shiny thing that I get to experience for the first time, but just what's included in the way that this is structured, I think is just a really well done set. I've done an unboxing video of this already to show what's inside of it, and I even did a playthrough of the solo adventure that's contained within here, and that solo adventure is designed to teach you the system, so you can go into this with really no knowledge of how this game works and understand the basics of it by the time you're done. It teaches you how to fill in the character sheet, it teaches you how to do skill checks and things of that nature. So it's an absolutely excellent set as far as that's concerned. It also has the character creation system that I prefer, which is sort of the quickfire method, where instead of rolling like with the standard version, you roll like 3d6 and you multiply your result, and you do like you buy your skills by I think multiplying your intelligence or your education stat or something like that. With this, it just gives you percentages that you can allocate, so it's a really quick, easy way to make characters, and it's just a really good system. I actually really like it, and having read the official version of character creation, this is still the version that I would go with in all of my games going forward. I like that method so much. The basic rule set included in here is really enough that you can run quite a few different scenarios, I'd say, with just the information provided within here. It doesn't really get into stuff like the Cthulhu Mythos tomes or spellcasting or things like that. But if you're just looking for a straight investigation-based campaign where you want to run, a handful of adventures where the players are just, your average people sort of going up against these situations, you can absolutely do that. There are 3 scenarios included beyond just the solo one that you can use, and it does a nice job of sort of easing you into it as well, because the first of the 3 scenarios is actually designed for just a single keeper and a single player. to sort of, like I said, ease you and comfort you into, understanding how to run the game. It'd be easy enough to adapt for a larger group if you really needed to, and it's something that you could finish in a single setting or session, but you also have some other more involved scenarios included as well. So you get 3 really good scenarios right out of the box, and you could even, if you wanted to, adapt the solo adventure into one for your group of players, bringing the total up to like 4 really good adventures in here. And again, this gives you all the rules that you need. The Keeper rulebook has a great selection of stuff in there as well. It has scenarios as well, spell casting, Cthulhu mythos, and stuff like that, as well as a much more involved sort of bestiary. But you could still do a ton with just this. And if the starter set's all that you get, you have months, I'd say. As long as you're willing to write your own stuff, you've got months and months of gameplay before you might want to start moving on to the actual, the full rulebook. But this is something that in all of my sessions, I referenced the rulebooks in here, just because it's a smaller book to flip through. And again, I just can't say enough good things about this particular starter set. So, and it is a starter set, so honestly, I would recommend beginning your Call of Cthulhu collection with this first before moving on to the hardcover. That's my personal recommendation. But if you, for example, you don't want to get the starter set, there is yet another option for you, and that option is the Call of Cthulhu 7th edition Quickstart rules. So this was something that was released prior to the starter set itself. You can get this physical version from DriveThruRPG, which is where I got mine. There is a link to DriveThruRPG in the description below if you're interested. And this contains a lot of similar information as to what's in the starter set rules, except it has, I think, only 1 or 2 smaller scenarios. But it still has a lot of great information in here. The PDF version of this also is free, if I recall correctly. So if you really just want to try it out, sort of dip your toe in the water sort of thing, you can get the PDF for free. Maybe run the scenario there, and build a few characters, and then you can move on to either the starter set or the hardcover. So another really good option. And again, the fact that you can get the PDF version for free. Again, I'm pretty sure it's free. I don't think because I downloaded the Quickstart rules before I bought the physical version. I'm pretty sure it was free. Another thing to note also is that if you're ordering these things from the Chaosium website, and I'll include that in the description as well, any physical item that you order there, at least the ones that I've ordered, also gave you a free PDF copy of that product as well. So it's something that you can read the PDF while you wait for the physical item to arrive as well. So it's just a nice, it's a really nice service that they add on with their particular website. So if you want to do that, I would recommend either getting it from their website directly or from a local friendly game store. I'm not a big proponent of like Amazon or stuff like that, or eBay for these sorts of things, but that's a whole other topic of discussion, I guess. But the Quickstart rules, another great way to get into this for a really cheap price, or if you don't mind reading PDFs, it should be free. Okay, so at this point we've at least got our start. You have the Quickstart rules, you have the starter set, or you just decided to go all out and purchase the Keeper rulebook, so you have the whole rule set there. There are a few things that I have in my collection that you can also add onto that, and the first thing that I would recommend would have to be the Call of Cthulhu Keeper screen. I've also done an unboxing video for this as well. Unboxing, I don't like to use that term if it's not in the box. I did a product opening video of this where I showed everything that came in there, and this is an absolutely amazing set. It's cost me around, I was trying to think here, so it's $29.95 US is the price for this, and I think I paid around $38 plus tax. I ended up getting 10% off when I ordered this, but this is one of the best GM screens I've ever seen, like just with everything that comes in it. It's actually kind of spoiled me and and makes me sort of resistant to the idea of buying a lot of other just basic DM or GM screens, because you just get so much with this. So you get the screen itself, which is a 3-panel screen, and I've had other 3-panel screens, and this one I think is just constructed a little bit better than the other ones that I have, because right out of the package, it just sat really nicely. Even though it's folded up sort of in this unusual way, it just, it sat like that perfectly from the very first time. Whereas other 3-panel screens that I have, one of the panels, the one that's, sort of folded that way in the first place, works perfectly fine. But then the other one wants to like go out like that, so you have to put something on the side of it to keep it from doing that. So from that perspective alone, it's a really great screen. Has a lot of useful information on there. Absolutely excellent, GM or keeper reference charts on it. But it also comes with things like maps. It comes with blank character sheets. It comes with an adventure book with I think it's 2 different scenarios that are pretty decent length. So you just get a ton of value for what you're paying for. And I'm the kind of person, I love having screens. They're some of my favorite things to own and collect. And this is, like I said, one of the better values for your dollar for all the different screens that I've purchased over the years. This is probably, again, one of my favorites just because of how much stuff is packed into it. It gives you maps of the known world. It gives you maps of like Lovecraft Country. It gives you a map of Arkham. It has maps for the individual scenarios that are included. It's just really, really excellent accessory. And if you're going to be serious about running Call of Cthulhu, this is probably after whatever rule product that you get to get you started. This is the next thing that I would recommend, and it actually was like the next thing that I ended up purchasing. So right alongside of the starter set and the rule book, which I got pretty closely around that same time as well. Alright, so let's just say you've been running your Call of Cthulhu game for a while, and you want to add just a little bit extra to your game. There are a few different options. The first one, I have to say, is the Call of Cthulhu Investigator handbook. Now, this is something that is not a required item to pick up. It's not something where, like, the keeper book is all the stuff that the game master, the keeper, needs to know, and all of the player options are contained within the keeper or the investigator handbook. The investigator handbook is, however, a really useful supplement with just a nice bundle of things in there. So it gives you a much broader list of professions that you can go through. For example, so the rulebook, the core rulebook, or the keeper rulebook, has a pretty decent assortment of different professions for you to have. And professions are sort of a template that tell you what your primary skills are, and things along those lines. But the investigator book just has a much more expanded version of that, and it has just some useful information for players looking to create investigators. And it has an expanded equipment list. It's just a really fantastic book overall. It's not an essential purchase by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a worthwhile one, especially if you're going to be running stuff long term and you want just a little bit of new options here. Another thing that I also really like about this is that it also includes the entire story of the Dunwich Horror in here as well. So it gives you, in addition to the game rule stuff, it also gives you just one of the better, or one of the more famous, I should say, because they're all really good in my opinion, but one of the more famous H.P. Lovecraft stories to boot. So really awesome there. The retail price for this is $44.95 US, and it only cost me around $55 Canadian, so I got a pretty good deal on that here. Another thing I should say about all the Chaosium books is they also include this ribbon bookmark that you can use, and I've already made some use of that with my Keeper rulebook. So again, something that they didn't need to include, but it is a nice little extra to have in there. All right, so let's just say, lastly, you've been playing the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game for a while, but you constantly find that the investigators are just no match for the creatures that they're going up against. The players themselves might get tired of running. They may want to have more of a fighting chance against the monsters, but the limited hit points, the loss of the sanity, the diminishing returns on your luck skill, all of those things could have sort of an impact over time. So there's an option for that as well, and that is Pulp Cthulhu. So this is the two-fisted action and adventure against the mythos variant of the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. This is for use with the 7th edition rules, and it is recommended that you have the 7th edition rulebook with you as well, because this references it, but it doesn't completely reproduce everything that you need to know. But it does give you some really interesting options if you wanted to play a character that's a little bit more durable. It's more like, at this point, you're less of the typical Lovecraftian protagonist that's just, inches away from completely losing their minds altogether, to being more like a movie character that is, going up against these crazy situations, but always finds a way to overcome the odds. And not that you're always going to find a way to overcome the odds, but this rule set does give you a slightly better chance. The first thing is that when you're determining your hit points, normally you add your Constitution ability to your size ability, and then in the default rules you divide that number by 10, which generally gives you a number between you'd have to have like 100 in both to get 20 hit points, for example, which is like the maximum sort of that you can have. In this version you only divide by 5, so if you had 100 if your total added up to 100, instead of having 10 hit points, you'd have 20 hit points. So it makes your characters a little bit tougher that way. It also adds new abilities that you can take based on your profession that you can choose, your pulp archetype, and they can take the form of either like physical, mental, types of things. So one, for example, allows you to spend your luck points to reduce your sanity on like a 1-to-1 sort of basis. That's one of the mental ones. One of the physical abilities, I think, allows you to spend your luck points to reduce damage, but you don't have to spend as much as the option in here would give you by default. So just some really cool stuff there. It also introduces some like psychic elements, so you can have a character that is clairvoyant or telekinetic, which I think would actually be kind of fun to put into one of my current games, and I might actually end up doing that. We'll see how that goes. This also sort of advances the storyline or the timeline a little bit. So this takes place or introduces the era of the 1930s. Now, the regular rule book has two different eras that you can play in. It's either the 1920s or the 2020s, or the late 20 teens or whatever, whenever the book first came out. But you have either the Lovecraftian era or you have the modern day. And I will probably never run a modern day adventure. It's not that I have any issues with it, but if I wanted to do that, then I do have another system that I could do that with for Call of Cthulhu. But I do absolutely love the 1920s era. In fact, the actual current campaigns that I'm running are set in the sort of early on in the 1900s. So they started in 1902, and they're currently in like 1910, 1911 for the different groups. And that's to incorporate some other interests of mine that revolve around that time period, just to incorporate into a scenario, just because I kind of want to. But having the option to go into the 30s as well is actually really kind of interesting and cool. So this is more of the action-oriented Cthulhu system. So while I like the fact that it's not a combat-oriented system, that might eventually change. So if that does change, then I do have this book to use here. And they're just elements that I could also just cherry pick from this into another. So for example, I could make one of the characters discover telekinetic abilities or psychic abilities or something along those lines, and using the rule set that is in here. So yeah, so that is my Call of Cthulhu collection at this point in time. So it's not like comprehensive. There are a ton of adventure books that are out there as well, a couple of which I would love to pick up at some point in the near future. But there's also a book that is like a collection of like mythos tomes and spells and stuff like that. So that's probably the next book that I want to pick up, but that's again to sort of expand things. But I think these books here will give you a very, very solid foundation to start building some great adventures and great stories, and it's just a lot of fun to run games sort of in this setting. And I honestly find that because I do own the D20 Call of Cthulhu, and that game never quite worked out as well. And I think it's because it was based off the D20 system, which is a very combat-oriented game. And even in the Call of Cthulhu D20 version, your character builds were either based off being defensive or offensive. And then you took like your skills sort of based off of what you wanted for your profession, but you had a level progression, and it was all built around combat sort of stuff. You had feats, and you had just all these things that I just don't think lent itself well to the Lovecraft style. It was certainly fun to try, but having tried this out, I just found that the success rate that I've experienced with the 7th edition rule set is just so much better, because the whole rule system is completely designed around something other than just getting into fights, killing monsters, and finding treasure. And that with the players knowing that, because it's just part of how they build their character, it puts them in a different mind frame. Like I've had the same players that were in my Call of Cthulhu game are also in my D&D and Pathfinder game, and the player that sort of gives me the most grief in my the Pathfinder or D&D ones, based off like multi-classing characters and making sort of cheesy things to take advantage of combinations of character ability, stuff like that. He was one of the more engaged in terms of the role-playing, which normally he's more engaged in the combat. So it was really interesting to sort of see how well that worked. So I'm really, really loving it so far. And I think that this is an absolutely fantastic RPG out there, especially for people that are fans of Lovecraft to begin with, or even if you're not really familiar with H.P. Lovecraft himself. He's inspired so many other modern-day horror writers. I mean, even people such as Stephen King would cite H.P. Lovecraft as one of their major sources of inspiration. So if you're into horror sort of elements at all, and you're into role-playing games, I think this is a great system to check out. And again, you can either get the core rulebook, the starter set, or even a free set of PDF rules to get you familiar with the system before you start purchasing stuff. But here are a few items to consider for purchasing if you get to that point. So anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. I will be doing more comprehensive individual rules, or not individual rules, individual reviews of the Call of Cthulhu Quickstart rules, the Keeper Rulebook, the Investigator Handbook, and the Pulp Cthulhu at some point in the near future. But at the same time, I still wanted to get this video out before relying on all those other ones to be done. But if you want to see opening videos of the Keeper screen or an unboxing of the starter set, I will actually include something that you can click on at the end of this video to check those out. So let me know in the comments below if you guys have been playing the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. What version of the rules do you use? Is it the standard one? Are you using the starter set, the quick start rules? Are you using the Pulp Cthulhu? Let me know that in the comments below and how those experiences have gone for you. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Take care.